All right, we're slowly going live.
Hello, good evening. I was waiting in the queue, but now it worked out.
All right, perfect. We're live and we're now streaming full, about 10 people.
That looks good.
Wouldn't it be great if my camera would work too?
Have you tried restarting it? Always, right? So always some technical issues.
Yeah, I just restarted my computer, and before that I tried restarting Zoom and my camera software. So I'll try and plug in the camera.
Is there a creative phone solution that we can work with?
I can definitely plug in another webcam. Maybe that would work.
Aaron is an expert on Zoom technical issues.
All right. Okay, so we have about 10 attendees watching now. And I think it's good to wait a few more minutes. So if you still want to grab a drink, feel free to do that. And then we'll slowly let more people in. And we'll get started in about 3 to 5 minutes, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to chat without a camera for the next 5 minutes. So feel free to just like ask any questions or whatever.
Yeah, well, I think like what we can do anyway is like, can you do a super quick introduction of yourself? Because later on we'll do a proper introduction when everyone is there as well. But maybe, or how you get into the field, anything along those lines. I think it's interesting for people to hear anyway.
Sure, yeah. Bear with me while I'm giving this introduction, guys, because I'm trying to figure out why my camera, which I use for Zoom probably 10 times a day at least, is not working. Which is funny because it's the one time you need it to work, right? But yeah, I'll be trying to solve that while I talk. Yeah, so I'm Ian McIntyre. A lot of people think my name is Lane, but it's Ian. I am 28. I graduated from high school in Western Australia and spent my university years there too, studying at the University of Western Australia. Studied law and physics, and then decided that I wanted to start a bunch of companies and student groups and things like that. So spent a long time at university experimenting while I was studying law and science. And obviously that's a pretty broad thing to study too. So I was really just kind of trying to figure out what I was passionate about. It turned out I was most passionate about helping people do cool things, basically, just like enabling people to do cool things and building organizations around that. So the first organization that I built that was pretty successful was a music club at the University of Western Australia that kind of expanded across the state, that now is the Southern Hemisphere's biggest music club. Have I been muted for the last period of time?
I think you were. I didn't hear it anymore after some time. I heard biggest music club, and that was exciting. What comes after?
All right, well, I'll leave you in suspense about the rest of that bit of the story, because I'm really not sure what's going on for things to be muting. Yeah, long story short, I got to the end of my university career and had been friends with a couple of other guys that ended up being the founders of Hum along with me, who all had like a different perspective on neurotechnology and some of the technologies that are kind of ancillary to it, but were all pretty interested in it. My first co-founder was a medical doctor who did some research using transcranial magnetic stimulation at a university institution that's pretty good at neuroscience in Western Australia called the Harry Perkins Institute. And this is way back in like 2012 when TMS for treating paralysis was still relatively new. It was basically looking at could they stimulate different parts of the spinal cord / the brain directly to cause any improvement in the rehabilitation outcomes. But I was a healthy participant without a background in neuroscience. I didn't study any kind of biology at school. I was playing around with stuff that I now know is neuroscience, like biohacking, but really didn't know that this technology existed. And so to come into a room, be told to sit down and have a big cap put on, that counts down from 30 and then makes a big whack noise and makes your arms and legs go out of your control, was a pretty visceral introduction to the technology and the power that it has. So that was when I got first introduced to it. Since then, we added a couple of people to the founding team and discussed it for a couple of years. It was only in like 2017 that we decided to get really serious about this, when we were all staring down the barrel of a long career each in medicine, law, or engineering, which in Australia is more mining focused than technology focused, the engineering field. So it's less interesting than it sounds. But we decided to kind of rally around what we thought was most exciting of any of the neurotechnology that we could see, which was this transcranial stimulation stuff, which in the lab was showing results that were just unheard of with any other technology in the real world, doing things like accelerating people's learning speeds, improving outcomes for people with ADHD, etc. And that was what really excited us. We decided to form a company when, after coming to San Francisco and meeting with a couple of scientists and stuff like that, we were invited to pitch to the UC Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator program, which is UC Berkeley, but also just the entire University of California's accelerator. At that time, it was for companies that had like difficult scientific problems and a big vision to make the world better. And yeah, in late 2018, we founded the company, and we spent a couple of years trying to figure out who and how we were going to focus on the learning speed acceleration stuff that we were excited by, and basically have done two things over time. One, managed to build a platform that is really easy to use and not too scary and kind of more cost effective than anything that's come before, which is the patch you can see on the picture of me that's on the screen. And then secondly, have really, I think, learned a lot about how the technology is perceived by the general public, which is really useful if you're trying to start a neurotechnology company, but also really important getting like critical mass around a company here in Silicon Valley, because there have been a couple of attempts that haven't gone that well to do transcranial stimulation in the real world, as opposed to outside of clinical treatment and lab experimentation. Yeah. And so here we are. The company is still based in Berkeley. We're a team of about 10 people now. I'm the remaining founder. The other guys have all gone their separate ways. Unfortunately, one had to go back to Perth because of COVID. And we picked up a couple of really interesting people on the team here in Berkeley now, and are just commercializing this patch.
Nice. Thank you for the quick overview, and very much looking forward to your proper talk at the, in about 50 minutes, I think. And yeah, for the people that just joined in, this was a super short introduction from Ian in terms of how he got into the field, into neurotechnology, brain-computer interface, and later on we get to ask him more interesting questions, and he'll tell us a bit more about the story. So thank you very much, Ian. And for now, let's kick it off. So the first part of this is mostly like a neurotech buzz-in review. And buzz-in review essentially is an event once a year that NeuroTechX organizes. And those of you that have been here in the previous events, we organized one event in December on introduction to brain-computer interface, which was mostly like a very broad introduction into the entire field. So the people that were there will actually have some idea of all the things that are in there. I assume some of you are actually working in this field, and I know there are some people that are actually just curious. For all of you, there will be something here. So what we're going to do today is mostly pretty much recap the most important milestones and the most important things that happened, the most important developments within neurotechnology and brain-computer interface in 2020. And this is actually part of a bigger series. So NeuroTechX organizes Buzz-in Review once a year. And there are actually way more events, as you can see here on the slide, from Barcelona to Paris, to Boston, to San Francisco. And it's actually if you're very curious about this topic, it's actually worth watching multiple, because I've seen the one from London and Scotland 2 days ago, and you see that there are different, oh, let me see. I think it should work. Oh, sorry, I'm getting personal messages as well, which makes it a bit complex. I don't know whether everyone can see me or whether you're looking at the slides. That's the question. Furthermore, if you're looking at the slides, that's all fine as well. So the interesting thing is different chapters will have different, slightly different presentations. They will definitely have different speakers, and each one of you will actually see, each one has a different focus. So some are very research focused, some are very entrepreneurship focused. And today we're going to get into this. So for those of you who haven't heard it, very quick introduction. NeuroTechX, it's an international community, essentially facilitating the advancement of the entirely neurotechnology field, which means connecting people, right? The community function. They got a Slack group, which is great. A lot of different people in it. There are a lot of events like this, as you can see, in multiple countries. And also they have a lot of like innovation. And today you'll actually get to see some examples of the efforts that they started last year. And you've seen this, you've potentially seen this last time as well. And as you can see, it's growing. What it just means is that more and more people are getting interested in this. And that's also what you see. There's more different examples in different industries. And that's actually very good for the field as a whole. So short introduction on the team. Last time we didn't put a slide in, but 4 people. Me, Maarten, Philip, and Wessel. Philip and Wessel will actually present part of the Buzz and Review. So later today, you will actually see both of them. Maarten will be behind the scenes, but together we're trying to make this happen. If any of you is very interested in making more of these kind of events happen or want to help out in any way, just feel free to reach out to any one of us. All right. Well, I think you've seen this in the starting slide as well. So let's dive right into it. First off, a few big trends, right? So what are the biggest things that actually happened in 2020? And I think the first one is actually Kernel, in terms of it's the biggest neurotech startup there is with the most amount of funding. Last year, they raised an additional $53 million of funding, whereas before they already had 50, so it's over 100 million. It's not about the exact numbers, it's mostly about the direction that it's taking, right? What this means is like that the entire venture capital industry is also aware of the potential of this technology and is trying to get it like somewhat scalable. And I think a system like this, or a startup in the way that they do it in terms of offering neuroscience as a service, they're trying to get a general opportunity for any kind of business to actually get access to high-grade neuroscientific equipment. And the way that they're doing this is very interesting. They now have 2 products, the Kernel Flux and the Kernel Flow, whereas the Flux is more focused on the measuring magnetic fields. The Flow is newer. This is the one that you see here on the top as well. And that's more commercially scalable, and it's also time domain near infrared spectroscopy. So what it mostly means is that they're measuring how the blood is actually changing throughout the brain. And the interesting thing is mostly that they built an extremely good headset for a relatively okay price. So it's between 5 and 50K, which for most businesses that are actually very interested in this, or research institutions, this is actually a legit option. Also very interesting that they are also getting into virtual reality, which is a trend that we also see converging more in virtual reality and brain-computer interfaces, because well, it's a natural extension, right? In terms of you're in your virtual reality and you need to change your hands somehow. And now you're holding controllers, but the more you can do with your mind, the easier it will actually be to do that. So it's nice to see them getting on that trend as well. And they awarded a bunch of these flow devices to high-grade research and scientific institutes. So the teams that actually came up with the best examples on how to deploy this kind of technology out in the market to both see big scientific breakthroughs and also verify or validate the kind of market potential. And it's nice to see that this is actually out in the world. So most likely in 2021, we'll hear a lot more about this. The second part is Synchron. Synchron is an Australian startup. They already had about 1.5 million in funding, but they mostly have a very interesting technology, and you might have heard about it on some TED Talk. It's also called neural dust. Oh, sorry, no, I'm confusing things now. This is actually about what they can do is they can implant electrodes in the blood vessels in the brain, which mostly means that they don't have to do any damage. They don't have to cut open parts and put it in there. They can put it in the blood vessels and then leave it out, and the electrodes will kind of be there, and they can still stimulate the brain, which is extremely interesting next to the motor cortex. And there are some videos on this Stentrode device, which launched last year, and it's extremely interesting what this can do, because some people that weren't able to move at all, they can now actually chat, email, bank online, all of those different kind of things. And it's especially interesting to see that this is now pretty much close to actually getting this out in the market. Third off is the prosthetics. Sorry, I heard a question or something along those lines. Yes, the recording will be available online. Okay, so for the prosthetics, there are a few very interesting breakthroughs. And what you see is that there are a few key areas. So on the one hand, for example, the RPNI by University of Michigan, they focus way more on the kind of making sure that you can actually feel what is happening as well. So it's not just a prosthetic in terms of you being unable to feel what is going on there, but it's actually not harmful. So it promotes healthy nerve growth. And there's some kind of like bioamplifier in it. So it actually strengthens the signal that the brain is already providing, which means that it has to do less damage. And yeah, that's actually a very interesting one. There's also a great story about this. Well, it's actually a sad story in some ways, but very empowering in others, because this was a guy who lost 4 of his fingers, 4 digits, and he had to, well, he wanted a prosthetic, right? But the insurance didn't cover it. So he built his own, because he was quite good at engineering. So he built a mechanical kind of limb. And why is this so interesting? Also because like, this means that it's actually quite doable, right? We're now at the phase in this technology where people can start of like tinker with these things. And if you have some kind of understanding, then you will start to play with it. This is not necessarily that much of a entirely full brain-computer interface, because it's mostly mechanical, it's not electrical, but then again, that also has its benefits because it's waterproof and those kind of things. Then you also have the Atom Touch, which is about the atom limbs. And they actually went live a while ago and were focused more on the kind of, making sure that, oh, sorry, wait a second. Yeah. The atom limbs, it's also more in terms of individual finger movements, right? So you can move your individual fingers with a way more sensitive, kind of like very specific, because fingers are very specific and sensitive compared to an entire arm, right? So this is more about that kind of non-invasive muscle detection as well. And finally, we have Tesla Suit. Tesla Suit has been working on this since 2018, if I'm correct. And they are now developing more also in terms of virtual reality and mixed reality. And they are also like, this is a device or some kind of like a glove that actually increases haptics, right? So it gives you feeling, like it makes you feel things. Then it also has force feedback. So when you touch something, you will actually feel it coming back to you. There's motion capture. It will like kind of capture where you are in your environment. And it's just generally a very evolved kind of thing. And now it's interesting that it's also getting out in the market in terms of VR and all those kind of things. So that will also be there very soon. All right. Let me see. I think it is your turn, Wessel. Do you want to pick it up from here? I think you can. Perfect. Let me see for a second.
Yeah.
I think you can now share your screen.
Yes, I think this. Oh. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
So is everyone seeing my screen? Is that right? Um, sorry, can someone confirm that you are seeing my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Vessel. Now that Byram has given you some insights into the biggest developments when it comes to the neurotech in the industry, I will now give you a brief overview of really the most interesting findings when it comes to neurotech research in academia. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is these tattoo electrodes, and they may look a little bit gruesome, but they're actually very interesting. They were created by a group of researchers that collaborated between a few European institutions and the Waseda University in Japan. And what these tattoo electrodes allow for is for really high quality recordings and very easy application, similar to how a person would get a tattoo. So just to make sure, because I don't know what everyone's background is, but I'll be referring to electrodes a lot. And these are really the small technical units that acquire the brain data. So the more electrodes, the better. And I may also be referring to these as channels. What is so special about these tattoo electrodes is that what we see in neurotechnology is really two different approaches. So on the one hand, we have the non-invasive wearable devices. So think, for instance, about the kernel headset that Byram earlier referred to. And these are really amazing because they don't require any invasive surgeries, but they do have some issues as well because they have to deal with motion artifacts by a person moving, and they have to deal with noisier data because of skin conductance. So this has been an issue that portable headsets have been trying to deal with. Whereas on the other end of the spectrum, we have the really invasive neurotechnology that is implanted in the brain or on the top of the cortical surface. And these can really acquire very rich and high quality data. But the problem with these is obviously that you have to want the person to have this invasive surgery. So this is a really nice balance between both options, where it's not invasive and it can be easily applied, and it would lie just under your epidermal skin layer, where it could acquire really high quality data without having to deal with all the skin conductance and movement artifacts. So yeah, that's the first one. Second one is similar. These are drawn on skin electronics, and they were developed by researchers at the University of Houston and Chicago in July last year. And what they did is they created these electrodes that you can essentially just draw on top of the skin. And it is a very simple process, actually, as you can see here in the right image. All you would need is a stencil and the pen, and you would be able to just draw them on. So this is really great because, again, this avoids the problem of motion artifacts that we see with things that you would put on top of the skin. And it is very conformal, which means that there is a few gaps between the electrodes and the underlying skin. And the researchers have excitingly already found that by stimulating these electrodes, they were able to fasten wound healing. So that's very exciting too. Then a different field of research is that of the spinal cord. So here we're not looking at the brain, but more at our spine. And there have been a lot of advances in this field last year as well, specifically for nerve rehabilitation. Researchers at the University of Pittsburgh in July were able to repurpose spinal stimulators. So for you unfamiliar with what spinal stimulators are, about 50,000 patients a year get these stimulators implanted, and this is to deal with chronic pain. And what these researchers did is they were able to repurpose those stimulators to restore the feeling of touch in lost limbs. And this is really exciting, obviously, because it has great implications for the future of prosthetics, where we could actually have prosthetics that give us feelings and sensations, something Byram also talked about earlier. Similar findings were released by EPFL and Lausanne University Hospital in August. These researchers were able to restore mobility in paralyzed rats. And this is really exciting. What they did is they leveraged artificial intelligence technologies, specifically machine learning approaches, to recognize what neurons were involved in certain movements. And by doing that, after the rat was paralyzed, they were able to bring back movement in those rats by specifically stimulating the neurons that the machine learning algorithm had identified. So this is obviously very exciting, and I'm very curious to see where this research will go in the future. Last for research, I just want to talk about a few findings when it comes to the field of visual neurotech research, because this field has also seen very huge advances in the last year. So I think, first of all, it's important to understand that there are different types of blindness. So someone could have damage to their retina or their eye, and then that person would go blind. Or they could have damage to their optical nerve and or their visual cortex, which lies at the back of our brain. For the two last options, so the optical nerve issues and the visual cortex issues, we can refer to these patients as being clinically blind. And researchers have been trying to bring back vision in these patients. One way, research that has shown very exciting findings is that by Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas, last May. And these researchers were able to show that they could show shapes on the in blind people by essentially tracing these shapes on the visual cortex. And they did this using implanted electrodes that were laying on top of the visual cortex. And these patients described that they were seeing glowing spots or lines that were forming these letters, like skywriting. So this obviously, again, has great implications because this could mean that we could show intentional things to people that are blind, clinically blind. And then the last finding that I wanted to discuss, again, about the field of visual research is also very exciting. This is released by Monash University in Melbourne, Australia last September, and they were readying the world's first vision restoration device for human clinical trials. They had already shown its effectivity in sheep, so that's amazing. And they are now hoping that they can help. They use the same device to restore vision in the clinically blind patients. Yeah, so I think that's it. Sorry. So that was it for the research news of 2020. And then there are also some great, thank you. Then I just also wanted to discuss some technological innovations that have happened over the past year, because there have been some amazing advances. And I think it's actually really important to know these, especially if you're trying to get into the field as an entrepreneur, or if you're a researcher and want to use the most up-to-date technologies. So first of all, some non-invasive consumer neuroimaging devices that have been released and developed last year. All the way on the left here, we have the Zetos ZEEG. And I think this one may be especially interesting for you who have not necessarily gotten any background in neuroscience research, because this EEG headset does not require any professional training to use. It requires zero preparation and uses dry electrodes. And it's also very useful if you, for instance, do a routine EEG, or if you need an emergency EEG. Also, it's wireless, so you can just connect it to any device. And that's, I think, really special. The second from the left here is the Neurosity Notion 2.0. This device is also very special, but for different reasons. So this device contains its own central processing unit, its own GRAM, and its own onboard machine learning program. And it also has internet connectivity. So really what you're seeing here is a device with the power of a laptop that you can wear on your head. And I think this device may be especially interesting for those among you who are trying to develop apps or digital services. I think on the website of Neurosity, I saw a very exciting example of this, where they used the headset to detect cognitive states And by doing that, they were able to change the ambient music. So if someone was in a very focused state, they would be able to turn off the notifications on their other devices and also play music that would help them focus. The third device here is the OpenBCI Galea headset. Also very special, again, for different reasons. So if you have a bit of background in neuroimaging, you may know that there are different ways that we can acquire brain data. And essentially what this headset does is it combines these different forms of acquiring brain data. So there is, I think, 4 different modalities in this headset. And moreover, it allows for eye tracking and it's compatible with a VR headset. And I actually saw yesterday, I think, that OpenBCI Galea and Valve Industry, which is a gaming industry, announced a collaboration where they would be working on very immersive gaming experiences. So I think that's very exciting. And then the last example that I wanted to share here is the one all the way on the right. It's the G-Tech Pendolin headset. I think this one might be especially interesting for the researchers among you. This headset is ultra high density, and I think it's good to understand what we consider high density in neuroscience research. So anything with over 128 channels would qualify as high density. And to put that into reference, this G-Tech Pendolin headset that was released last year contains a whopping 1,024 channels. So that's amazing for a non-invasive consumer neuroimaging headset. So then on to some stimulation and modulation devices. I have to say I have very little background in this, but I think we have Ian later talking about the hum device, which is actually, I think, an application of this. So all the way on the left here, we have the NeoRhythm, which uses transcranial magnetic stimulation. So it actually stimulates your brain. It claims to help with sleep, to help with stress, and to also help with working memory. I've seen some examples. So yeah, very cool. The other 2 here on the right are tapping into auditory frequencies. So it's sound that they're using. I think it's very high density sound frequencies, and they're targeting certain areas, especially the middle headset here. I think it is supposed to help with stress relief. And the one on the right, I think, would be more interesting for researchers because you could use it across the scalp in different regions. So then 2 last things that I just want to discuss that are more related to invasive neuroimaging and the advances that were made in that field last year. Arguably a very exciting one has been announced by Paradromics in July. And they announced that they had the largest ever electrical recordings in the cortex. So they created this small patch of electrodes that contains over 30,000 electrode channels. And they showed its successful implementation in the sheep cortex already. And I think they're hoping to use this device now to help restore communication in people with severe paralysis. And then the last thing I just wanted to show you is the Neuralink. For those of you who are close to neurotechnological advances, I'm sure you've heard of this. So this is a company that is owned by Elon Musk. And the company created what's called the Link. It's this small sealed device that is implanted. I think right now what they did is implanted on top of the sensory motor cortex. And what they showed is its successful implementation in pigs. And they were able to recognize certain movements using artificial intelligence. And as you can see here, the predicted movement was very close to the actual one. But I've heard that in the future, they really want to extend on what the Link can do. But first application would be its help for paralysis patients. Yeah, so I think that's it for my part. I think stop share. Yes.
All
I
right.
think Philip is on.
All right.
Hey,
Yes.
Ian, your camera works. That's also good news.
Woohoo!
That
You wouldn't
looks
believe
great.
what I just had to do to make it work, but we're here.
I love the
Nice.
neon sign as well. It
Thanks.
reminds me of
Yeah,
reminds me somehow of the
cool.
music club you were talking about earlier.
Yeah. That's right. That was the goal.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Well, hey everyone. If someone can confirm that my screen is visible,
Confirmed.
then we will get down to the regulatory approvals. When you have a neurotech company, and most neurotech companies are America-based still in the United States, as soon as you come close to creating something that counts as a medical device, you have to get an FDA approval. And these people are quite tough. So when you have the approval, that's actually a big step in the development of your product or service. And it's always exciting to see what the companies that have actually cleared these approvals have been up to. So let's talk about that. The first one is NeuroTechX, and they are a company that is helping people with depression, especially severe depression, through magnetic stimulation. And especially now in the COVID times, people are not able to travel to a location where they can receive ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. This is shock therapy, by the way. So these are people that have a very long-lasting and severe depression, because shock therapy is, it's kind of old. They do it in the movies as well, but they still use it as kind of a last resort for when people do not respond to medication and other antidepressants. But when people are not able to travel to a location, this causes a severe problem. So this device actually allows them to undergo treatment at home with direct current transmagnetic stimulation, and this alleviates them from their depression symptoms, which is quite amazing, because in these times of crisis in the COVID situation, it's incredibly hard for people that have a neurodegenerative or neuropathology or a psychological disease, and this is a huge help. So happy to see that. Then there is Endeavo Rx, which is actually a product of an entrepreneur and a company that I admire very much, Adam Gazzaley. They make closed-loop video games to help children that have attention deficit disorders learn more quickly. And what is so wonderful about this company is that they don't really require any type of like headset, invasive or non-invasive. They just build games. And the idea of a closed loop video game is that whatever action the child that is playing this game performs directly results in either a good or bad result within the game. And neuroscience has shown that this is an amazing way to trigger neuroplasticity, even in children that have attention deficits, because neuroplasticity is key to learning and learning new skills. The problem is that children that have attention deficits have a problem staying focused. So when they are presented with these motivating games, closed loop video games, it becomes a lot easier for them to learn through the natural process of neuroplasticity. And the company Akili and their game Endeavo, which is their second or third game already, cleared FDA approval and will probably be hitting the markets in as well as America and Europe soon. Then there is Percept, which is a deep brain stimulation device. And the special thing about this is that although deep brain stimulation has been quite common in neurotech and also before in neuropharmacology as a combined treatment, Percept PC allows therapists to track the results of the stimulation in real time. So when the therapists are actually treating the patients that are dealing with neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's, Tourette syndrome, or other kinesthetic related neurodegenerative diseases, they can check in real time what the neurostimulator is doing and chronologically capture that. All in short, this just means that they can highly personalize treatment for each individual patient, which is a great step forward from quite an old school technique like deep brain stimulation. Then we have Abbott's iOS compatible app, which is also combined with deep brain stimulation. And this is all about making everything around the treatment a lot easier. And they cleared FDA approval to help patients easily pair their treatment on their smartphone or any iOS device so they can easily personalize it, combine it with whatever therapy sessions they have, pharmacological medicine that they're using, or anything else. And this is overall a huge friction reducer for patients that have serious conditions and would like to receive help in a very positive way. Then there is the BrainWay device, which is transmagnetic stimulation that helps people deal with smoking addiction. So people that are addicted to smoking are usually treated with any other psychological therapy or some pharmacological approaches as well. And the special thing about this device is that it actually stimulates brain regions that are associated to addiction, like the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And by stimulating this with direct current, what's happening is that the addiction symptoms caused by neurophysiology are being reduced in these patients. The thing that I would like to know more about in this one is the details and the scope of the treatment, but I haven't found much research about it. So if any of you know something about this, feel free to hit me up, because I'm also especially interested in this one. All right, then there is the DECA Look prosthetic arm and the Utah slant array, which is in the same area of neurotech that Wessel and Bayram were talking about earlier as well. And this Utah slant array that has been on the market for quite a while is kind of the golden standard for arrays, because it has a really high density of recording, it has a really high granularity, and it allows patients to perform specific and very in-depth controlled movements and receive real-time feedback of those movements as well. And I mean, of course, we've seen bionic arms and legs and other body parts for a while now, but this kind of golden standard of array really helps bringing it to a next level in terms of sensation, but also in terms of action. Then another incredibly exciting and special one is about Alzheimer treatment, which is brought by NeuroEM. And as some of you may know, Alzheimer is caused by the accumulation of certain proteins, amyloid and tau proteins, in the brain, which is causing the brain to degenerate. To shrink in certain places in the gray matter, and to overall decrease cognitive function. And usually this is being treated again neuropharmacologically. And the promising thing about this treatment is that it's again a current stimulation device, and by applying this to the brain, they actually directly reduce the amount of tau and amyloid proteins that are in there, and with that immediately countering and reducing one of the causes of Alzheimer's. So this is quite a breakthrough, because Alzheimer treatment has been very, very tough and a long road, and we still have a long road ahead of us. But this is something that is incredibly special because it directly tackles one of the main causes. And then lastly, we are going to talk a little bit about this new MRI machine, which is the Signa 7.0T. And that 7.0T stands for a 7 Tesla magnet that is in there, which is about 4 or 5 times more powerful than a regular fMRI machine. And well, of course, this is something that the MRI industry has been striving towards for a while now, and it really helps in diagnosing patients that have microvascular diseases or musculoskeletal diseases that are really hard to spot with regular fMRI machines because the granularity isn't that high. But with this one that is 4 to 5 times as powerful, it's probably the most powerful magnet that is around there that humans can be around. It becomes a lot easier to diagnose these more specialized cases of musculoskeletal diseases and microvascular diseases. And that brings us to the end of the FDA regulatory approvals already, which means that I'll pass it on to one of my colleagues. Thank you.
All right, nice. There we go. Thank you, Philip. That was great. Let me see whether we can do this smoothly. All right. Can anyone confirm you see my screen now?
Yes. We're seeing your
Right.
screen.
All right, sounds good. As for the tech funding, so there are a bunch of different topics, right? We touched on a few: kernel, synchron, but there are, of course, also a bunch of interesting Kickstarters, right? So this is way more on the beginning side of the innovation phase. So for those of you that were at the previous event, you might have seen, well, you definitely have seen Jason from Mind Effect. And what they were doing is essentially building a BCI and in some ways open sourcing it so people can actually build their own brain-computer interface. They called this Make 100 and they put it on Kickstarter, and they actually got about 15,000 euros, which is mostly a good way to get started. And it's some validation that a bunch of people are very interested in doing something along these lines, right? Bring Bionics. Slightly different. This is this will be very much appreciated by the gamers among you. Essentially, this is, let's say, when you're playing a video game, it's extremely important that you click fast. And what this does, it reduces the lag between you wanting to click your mouse and you actually clicking it. Because there's about, if I remember correctly, about 150 milliseconds before, like between the moment that you want to click the mouse, the intention, and the moment that your finger is actually putting backwards. Whereas this thing will actually sense it in your wrist and it will automatically pull your finger, reducing or cutting the size at the time in half. So for professional gamers, if this works as they say it works, this could be a very big thing. Then as for Happy, they have a very interesting proposition in terms of choose how you feel. It's the first wearable that fully claims this. It's a very interesting topic, and there is definitely some, there are a lot of scientists that are very excited about this, so there must be something. I'm curious what the science behind this looks like exactly. Couldn't find it on their website, but essentially they're working with magnetic waves, as far as I remember. All right. Then there is Rune Labs. This is actually one that I was personally curious about because a venture capitalist from London who potentially wanted to invest in this reached out to me to give some feedback on this field. And essentially what they're doing, so they closed the round, about £5 million, if I remember correctly. I see dollars here. But I think essentially what they're doing is they're trying to make it easier to label, organize, and analyze brain data. So what you have now is a lot of different distributed systems for different patients. Very hard to analyze how one patient compares to another, very hard to analyze among one patient, like for yourself even, like connecting it to previous times, etc. And what they're doing here is they're focusing on multiple elements in terms of the neurotech wearables and the apps, so all the data that's from there, then an automated data pipeline that will actually connect it to high-performance neural databases, which is essentially the database where you put all the data in. And then there's the streaming, the API, and the visualization, analytics, and insights. So, and they're focused initially, especially on the neuromodulation therapies such as DBS, so deep brain stimulation and transcranial magnetic stimulation. If this works as they say this will work, this could be a very big breakthrough that will help a lot of different patients, especially in these areas. Then there's MaxStim, which is the global leader in transcranial magnetic stimulation. And they acquired Electrical Geodesics Inc. Sorry, I was having some issue with that name. EGI. And EGI is focused on EEG. So what's happening here? Essentially, MaxStim is already good at stimulating the brain, right? With transcranial magnetic stimulation, that's essentially what you're doing. And they're trying to close the kind of feedback loop by acquiring EGI, because then they will have the EEG data. So then they can not only be able to stimulate the brain, but they will also be able to record the actual, well, the outputs, right? The effects of their stimulation. So that actually closes the loop. So this is a very interesting one to keep an eye out for. Then, oh, let me see. Yes, then there's Neurovalence. They also had a 5 million funding and rounds. And essentially what they're doing is they're building devices also in terms of magnetic stimulation for specific issues that a lot of people have and that seem to have some cause in well, the neurology essentially. And so these devices actually treat conditions like diabetes, insomnia, anxiety, obesity, and all of these. And this is actually in the final phases of the trials, right? So this is not something that might work in the future. This is actually something that has proven useful and hopefully will prove more so. Then there's Nia Therapeutics. Another very complex topic, but essentially what they're doing is building very small chips that, like implantable neurostimulation memory devices, right? So very small chips that will actually be implanted next to, if I remember correctly, your hippocampus, and that it will actually interact with your working memory. So for people that have memory disabilities, this will actually be a huge outcome. Also good to see that this is the kind of funding. And just to zoom out for a second, as you can hear, a lot of the biggest breakthroughs are actually in the medical industry, right? And that makes a lot of sense because those are the kind of things that are most useful to humanity as a whole. And then on the Kickstarter, for example, you see more of the kind of fun projects, right? So that's very interesting, just to zoom out for a second. All right, back in the presentation. Finally, I think Astellas and IOTA, they were initially working on a partnership, an R&D agreement before. This is where I spoke before. IOTA is the company that actually came up with what is commonly nicknamed as neural dust. And these are essentially, like officially it's called the ultrasonic powered bioelectronic devices, sorry. And essentially these are extremely small, battery-free, wireless devices that you can put, well, essentially that go inside the brain, and then they will be able either to stimulate or to record, hopefully both at some point in the future. And initially they worked on an R&D agreement, and now they actually fully acquired them. Also to see how this could improve like overall. If you're very interested in how Astellas exactly tries to improve healthcare, then you could look at the RX program, but I think it's relatively complex, so I won't be getting too much into it here. Okay, we're near the end, so that's very good. I hope all of you are warmed up for Ian. We still have a few more slides. First off, competition results. So this is where the NeuroTechX community, because honestly, I would say that the NeuroTechX community is by now actually having a major impact on the neurotech and BCI industry, essentially. Most of the people that get into this field have either heard of it, they have found other people in the field, they have worked with others, and there are NeuroTechX is actually organizing a lot of different initiatives, and these are all coming from the community themselves, right? Some people that actually want to work on things. One example is the Neureka Epilepsy Challenge. Essentially, this was a seizure prediction competition, right? So they got a huge data set, and these were all including like data from epileptic seizures. And then the idea was actually which of the teams could build the best model that could predict seizures the best, right? And I don't have the exact numbers, but from what I remember, there was only about like a 1 to 2% error rate. I could be wholly mistaken here, so if I am, please correct me in the chat. But I think that's actually something along those lines, which is amazing. They actually built that in about a day. Even if it would be slightly more, very interesting to see these kind of initiatives happen, right? And the winners were Biomed Irregulars from Belgium. Okay, then hack your senses. For those of you who know David Eagleman, he is actually the one of the founders of Neosensory, and they are essentially, well, Neosensory is a bracelet. You might have seen it in the last presentation as well. That is in some ways giving you new senses, or it's trying to replace specific senses with something else. So think about, for example, you cannot you cannot hear a lot, and then you can use this bracelet to actually feel instead of hearing, right? So it will translate these kind of things. And they built a contest where people could come up with their ideas, and the winner was actually in air quality, right? So you could feel whether the air quality was good or not good, right? So some very interesting applications. Then NeuroTech also had student clubs competitions where students could actually come up with cool ideas and work on them. And the three that are definitely worth quickly going through are, first off, EMG board. Essentially, this is like classifying finger movements, right? So let's imagine that you're typing on your keyboard, but there is no keyboard, you're doing it on the table. Well, your fingers are still making the same movement. So if you measure the muscle movement in your hand, you might be able to actually see what the intended typing was, right? So thereby you can bypass the entire process of typing itself. Polydodo is more about offering a cheaper and more accessible way to do sleep studies at home. And Jellyfish is an EEG headset more in terms of different head sizes, comfortable to wear and 3D printable. All right. Then, as for BitBrain was also doing a competition. They are manufacturing hardware equipment also for this neurotechnology. And they had a contest and they actually upped the total. Also some very interesting things coming out of this. If you're curious, feel free to check any of these. This entire presentation is meant as a kind of like teaser, right? A tapas, and afterwards you can look at the things that you find most interesting. And finally, I think this is one of the very, very last slides, the Cybathlon. This is actually very interesting. So let's say we have the Olympics and we have the Paralympics. Well, this is actually a step before it in terms of like, it's a competition where people with disabilities can actually compete on these kind of like challenges with, let's say, a powered arm or a powered exoskeleton. There are this is an amazing initiative, and I think these are the kind of things that we should focus on as an ecosystem as well. All right, and finally, for NeuroTechX, like I said before, a lot of people involved worldwide. This is actually, well, a lot of people are involved. And with something as complex as neurotech or brain-computer interface, it's essential that you have a diverse way of looking at it, right? If this is only a bunch of older white men, nothing against older white men, don't get me wrong, but like if it's only that specific subgroup, bias will inevitably creep into the entire decision-making process of the field, and that will not be good for its long-term value to society, right? So it's key to have more people into this. Luckily at NeuroTechX, this is actually happening. This has been here pretty much from the beginning, and there are people actively working on this. So if you're curious about this, feel free to check in. EEG notebooks, another very cool project. This is all about simplifying cognitive neuroscience experiments, right? So it can be more in terms of like mobile EEG. It's Python based, as far as I know, and more people are getting involved in this. So if you're curious about this, either to test it or to help develop it, feel free to reach out. And this is all about like another initiative is about there are so many different publications, right? So many different scientific papers, research findings, all with different elements, right? It's not all uniform. Different data formats. It can be that the data is slightly different. And essentially what they're trying to build is just one benchmark, making sure that all of these different kind of scientific publications can be done in the same kind of way, which would be extremely useful. And as for the content laboratory, this makes a lot of sense, I think. If you go to neurotechx.com, you can find it, the blog, you can subscribe to the newsletter. There are a lot of different interesting topics. Honestly, I've seen some of the best articles that I've read on Neurotech and BCI. I found them through the newsletter. So this is actually worth subscribing to if you're not that much involved in the scene. And these were some of the biggest events last year. I think we covered most of these, so no need to go over it. And finally, one quick mention, Google also got into this in terms of the Moonshot Factory, which is very interesting to see. They were trying to find a biomarker for depression. They didn't find it. In short, most likely there either won't be one or it's context specific, which I personally assume. It's interesting to see all of these tech giants getting into it, right? Like from Facebook, who is actually buying control kits that's working now with the VR headsets, or is Google in their Moonshot factory. It just means that this technology has reached some level of maturity so that it can be used on a broader scale, right? Which is very interesting. All right, that was it. Thank you very much. And now on to the main guest of the night, which is Ian. Ian, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you for having me. And that was a really informative presentation even for me. So
right, good to hear. I cannot claim the credits. This is actually the community that did it. Like, that's the beauty of a community like this, right? Everyone collects all the different pieces and then you have good stuff. But I'm happy to hear that we could even provide something.
Yeah, no, really fantastic. And I would just encourage you guys to try and get that presentation out to as many people as possible, because the more people know what's going on in neurotech, the more people I think will attract, because it's very exciting to see these things stitched together into one place.
All right, good to hear. Good to hear. Well, we're working on it. And thank you very much for helping in making this happen. All right, so we got this slide for you. What would you like? Shall we close the slide and open your video so everyone can see you? That might be the most interactive. What do you think?
This is fine for now. Maybe we can get a bit creative in a minute, but maybe if you could just, no, this will be fine. Hi everyone, I'm up in the corner here. My name is Ian. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of a company called Hum. Hum started in Western Australia several years ago, but is now based in Berkeley in California. We're based here chiefly because it's close to UCSF. There's a lab there run by the prestigious guy already mentioned, Dr. Adam Gazzelli, is an entrepreneur, as well as a neuroscientist that runs the lab called Neuroscape there that we were really interested in being close to. And secondly, we're here in Berkeley because we were part of the Berkeley Skydeck Accelerator program, which is one of the most active seed investment VCs in the world, but also a really fantastic community of people who are trying to change the world by taking on hard problems with a positive attitude. So that's why we're here in Berkeley. Our company builds, our vision is to build technology that allows people to take mastery of their destiny, basically, but primarily by focusing on the brain, because we believe there's a lot of untapped potential in neurotechnology to really give people better outcomes in life in many, many ways. We're starting with something really simple though, which is a little patch that you can see on the screen on my forehead there, a little creative illustration we had done. The patch is basically just a tiny battery and a circuit that simply cost like affordably and unintimidatingly introduces people to some of the really cool stuff that neurotechnology can do for the everyday person. It's basically a patch you wear for 15 minutes that tunes the electricity in your brain by putting it through your forehead into your skin, through your skull, into your brain, in a really tiny way that has a really big effect. What it's doing is it's boosting a signal for the nerds amongst us, of which I hope I'm one. It's boosting the 6 Hertz frequency, which is smack bang in the middle of what we call the theta band of brain signals, these electrical signals that are just in the brain all the time. It's boosting that signal and causing it to stick around for a while. It's not something that the brain never does by itself. It's actually the realization that we could do this came from looking at a lot of EEG data, brain electricity recordings, and realizing that when people were really healthy people were really focused and learning things fast, you could see a pronounced presence of theta. You could see this frequency band having a lot of strength, being the waves being basically high on the amplitude recording. What it's doing, we think, is connecting a neural circuit throughout the brain, but starting with the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain just underneath your forehead. It's kind of the most evolved part of the brain that separates us the most from any animal that came before us in the evolutionary timeline. It's boosting the signal in that prefrontal cortex, but it's causing entrainment, an effect where basically just neurons throughout the brain join a circuit or resonate or fire at the same frequency. And what that seems to be doing is it's encouraging the ability of information to transfer through the brain. There's still work to be done on understanding the very deep explanation of how the brain works. And so there's also work to be done on a very deep explanation of how that entrainment effect causes an improved learning speed. But what we know from about 30 years of research focused on this technology, as well as commercialization, people who've come before us with commercialization with medical devices, like companies like Fisher Wallace and Cephally, that have had FDA approval and had, long usage by everyday people and overseen by medical doctors, etc. That it's safe. Long story short, that's the second thing that we know for sure. And the third thing we know for sure is that it seems to work really well. It doesn't work 100% of the time in 100% the same way. There is definitely variation between people, between days and amounts of effect that you notice, but it has a really reliable effect in the studies that we've done and the studies that we based our product on, in terms of improving firstly, the amplitude of that frequency in the prefrontal cortex and throughout the brain. And then secondly, in the ability to speed up learning and improve focus. And fundamentally, what we're improving is something called working memory capacity. Working memory capacity, you can kind of think of like the RAM of your brain. If your brain were a computer, it needs to store a lot of information in terms of your long-term memory, and that's kind of all your memories. But it doesn't need to store a lot of information in your very, very short-term memory, something we call the working memory, which is basically what your brain can consciously acknowledge at any time. And you can measure it in a couple of interesting ways. You can measure it by like the number of numbers that you can remember when someone says them to you, but you can also measure it with things like flashing blocks on a screen in a randomized order and trying to remember the order that they were in. And throughout a couple of these different types of tests, what we found is that by wearing the hum patch for about 15 minutes, firstly, after about 3 minutes, compared to the placebo patch, which is the same thing, feels the same, but isn't doing the precise electrical type of stimulation that we're doing. It's doing a different montage or a different type of electricity, we call it. That against that, you see this really pronounced effect in the size of someone's working memory capacity, the number of numbers that they can remember, the amount of flashing blocks in order that they can remember. And what that translates to when we use this every day, I use this every day, and something like 300 or 400 people have now used Hum's device for anywhere from a couple of sessions up to a couple of months worth of sessions, a couple of sessions a week. What we see is that people notice that they can learn things faster, they acquire skills faster, and that those skills stick around. It's accelerating the speed at which you acquire skills, and those skills stick around. You also notice that you can focus easier, and you also notice that you can kind of block out distractions or multitask a bit easier. So it's a new device. We haven't yet put it onto the market publicly. We've been developing this for about 2.5 years now. It's something that is not a medical device, is important to know. We're putting it through something called the 513G processes, which is where you get a confirmation from the FDA that it's not a medical device. And we actually consciously chose that because in the lab results, in the lab studies that came before us that we based this on, they had found there was a pretty pronounced effect for everyday healthy people. And we were personally very excited to be able to go straight to everyday healthy people and give them a benefit that is pretty transformational. But I also think there's a thing that not a lot of people think about, which kind of makes sense when you hear how I say it, which is that over the course of our lives, from the time that we're teenagers, our working memory and other measures of cognition generally decline. We just kind of accept that. I mean, millions of years of being in a very similar state to what we are today as Homo sapiens and how our brains work, we have just come to accept that we have this cognitive degeneration process that's called aging. And therefore we call healthy people who are experiencing that. But I know that I would like to be able to learn a language as fast as I was able to when I was 16. And I can tell you that my mother, going on nearly 70 now, very much the same, but to a greater extent. So that's kind of what this first product is doing. It's helping healthy people to learn things faster, to acquire skills faster. And I think that's really important because we're, especially today, experiencing what the whole world is experiencing with COVID, where we're having to learn a lot of new things. Jobs are changing and becoming based on fundamentally new skills. Job titles are being totally reinvented. Technology only accelerates, it doesn't slow down. And so it's important to be able to give people these tools, but the long-term vision is really to provide people the way, a simple, approachable, unintimidating, and cost-effective way to access the kind of benefits that we're seeing, that you've heard a bit about in the presentation from the lads from this neurotech research. And one of the fundamental premises that we founded this company and adopted this approach for the patch on was that there's a big problem in neurotech with things being too scary to the everyday person, too hard to understand, not very cost effective at all, and really hard to use. And so really, this first product is not inventing something entirely new. We're not the only people to know how this boosting 6 hertz theta thing works. What we're doing is we're giving the everyday person an introduction and the ability to get one of the most important benefits and most like groundbreaking benefits that we found in neuroscience labs as a way of introducing them to this technology, and then hopefully accelerating this process that we're all of us who are watching this and part of this group, NeuroTechX, very invested in, which is getting neurotechnology to help people. So yeah, that's a bit of a broad introduction. I'm the CEO. We have a team of 10 here in Berkeley, a couple of about 5 full-time people and 5 contractors. We've raised our seed round. It's still early days. We're still in the closed alpha testing phase where we're building software to go along with this that'll help you track your progress, set goals, know how to use the patch, learn about neuroscience in general, and also how this particular device boosts your memory. And yeah, one last thing that I'll say just by way of introduction is that we owe a lot to NeuroTechX as an organization. You know, we've been part of the Slack for many years. We've shared ideas. We've had meetups with random people from NeuroTechX Slack in cities that we just happen to be traveling to around the world. And this kind of group is where ideas like this are found and can really come from. So it's great to be now able to come back and like present something that has come out of NeuroTechX. And I'm also very excited by everything that happened in 2022. As you can see, there was a lot. There's a lot going on.
Right. I'll unmute myself to make it slightly more of a dialogue. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much for that explanation. I think that helps a lot. And I think that's, well, it's generally a very interesting story to hear how people get into this field. Maybe first a personal question, or at least one that I'm personally curious about. Once the device is fully there and it all works as it should work, what are you personally hope to use it for?
Yeah, I personally, as the CEO of a tech company, am constantly having to learn new things. And I think just as a young person in general at the moment too, but even as a human, you know, working in the white collar, knowledge-based industry, constantly having to learn new pieces of software. I myself am reading a lot of journal articles, a lot of trying to keep up with trends in all things from how best to manage people and motivate people to how to raise venture financing and things like that. So there's a lot of learning that I'm doing every day that I feel like I can never do fast enough. You know, one thing that I've been trying to do during COVID is to read a book a week. And it can be really hard to remember the things that I read in the book. It can be really hard to get through the book and can be hard to focus. So there really is like a pretty fundamental barrier to learning that I personally feel. But, you know, one thing that really inspired us to work on this technology and inspires me very much personally myself is that my family history has a genetic predisposition towards the dementia stuff and mild cognitive impairment in the meantime. And And I care a lot about my mother and my grandmother who had dementia as well, and really hope that our technology can be used to help people like that, not just with dementia, but people who have like this blockage to what they want to do in their lives and what's possible for them, that's caused by our current lack of understanding of what's going on in the brain, but also our inability to change things. And although there have been some very exciting bits of progress in these last 10 years, and it just feels like it's constantly accelerating, what really frustrates me, and is legitimately a very hard thing, is that there aren't a lot of easy to use devices that people can understand and approach. And so what I hope that our device does once we're finished and launched and it's in the hands of 10,000s of people, which is what's on the card for next year, is that really it gives people an insight in, and I mean, when I say people, I mean like the general public, 99.9% of whom I think don't know what the word neurotech means and don't know quite how exciting some of the stuff that's going on is. I hope that our device and our company more generally gives people the taste for the excitement that can come when you realize that there are these new tools coming out of the latest cutting edge science that you can use today and get a better brain and a better life out of. And we're starting in a modest place. You know, this isn't a magic pill. There's not something you use and all of a sudden you know how to code in Python overnight, but it really is better than anything that exists. I mean, the things that people reach for today, coffee, meditation, books and stuff like that on how to focus, they're very slow and they're hard to rely on. And a lot of the drugs and caffeine as well have questionable effect slash side effects potentially. Whereas what we seem to be doing with this patch and what seems to be possible for neurostimulation and neurotechnology in general is to go to the source and avoid a lot of side effects by tuning the way that the brain is working at its most fundamental levels. So yeah, I guess the three things that I hope to achieve with this patch are to help people today, to give people a taste of neurotechnology, and to hopefully show some success in focusing on making it easy to use and approachable. Whereas I think a lot of stuff that's come before has been hard and expensive, etc.
Yeah, that does make sense. And well, I hope if something like this gives people a more simple entry into this field, I think that's the key thing. And maybe aligned with that train of thought, let's say there would be someone relatively young wanting to get into this industry, but not having a background in behavioral psychology or technology, which is most of the people in the world, right? If you think about it, how would you recommend someone like that to get into the field?
Sure.
Someone who is pretty much entirely new.
I think we could probably disable the screen share for now too. I just wanted everyone to be able to get the chance to have a read of that while I was still talking, and maybe even click on the link.
Go.
Yeah.
Right.
So how to get into this? So I think this question has an even broader question that actually sits behind it. It's kind of, how do you choose what you want to do with your life? I personally got a lot of value from experimenting, and I think that's something that unites all of the team at Hum. Everyone in Hum has had experience with quite different industries and quite different just projects and passions, and so I think it's important to get a taste for a lot of things and to have a growth mindset, believe that it's exciting and motivating in and of itself to try things that you're unfamiliar with. Because unless you've really tried a lot of things, how can you know what you want to work on? So I think that's a really important thing to couch, but particularly with neurotechnology, there are a lot of very smart people who are actually very interested in neuroscience. This morning I was talking to Ethan Bernstein, a professor from the Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business School, about business psychology, and we were talking about a book that he teaches some values from called the Radical Candor book. He was saying, he's starting to get very interested in neuroscience because he has to, because a lot of the psychology and business just practices are now starting to be overturned or better informed by fundamental advancements in neuroscience. Things like an understanding of how working memory is one of the great gates to concentration, learning, and success. Things like how growth mindsets can actually have neuroscience behind them, neuroscience that can inform how we choose our mindsets and these kinds of things. So I think that having lots of conversations with people who are interested in this stuff, and trying to find people who are interested in this stuff, whether or not they're already part of a community like NeuroTechX, where I think we all know what the words EEG and brain stimulation mean, can kind of guide you towards opportunities. I don't think that the billion-dollar companies of neuroscience have necessarily been founded yet. I mean, there have been very few great commercial successes in the medical device and consumer spaces. So I think that the great companies that have come, maybe they've been started, some of them have been started already, maybe some of them are still to come. So meeting people and talking to people about this stuff and learning about neuroscience and keeping in touch with it could bring you great opportunities to start companies in the future, or to bring the stuff that you're passionate about in neuroscience to existing companies. And I think that's a really great tool. But if you want to get really involved in neurotech today, I know that everyone here is involved in NeuroTechX already, but I think this will actually end up getting pushed out to a lot of people who've never heard of NeuroTechX. Joining NeuroTechX and organizations that are looking at like connecting neurotech entrepreneurs and medical researchers and things like the Neurotech Leaders Forum from the Neurotech Reports people, etc., is a really great way to meet people who are doing interesting, exciting things here, and you can collaborate with them. There are lots of great companies to apply to. Everyone in neurotech, I think, is still pretty humble. Kind of feels more like the internet in the early 90s or the late 80s than it does a big tech industry where everyone's cutthroat trying to beat each other out. So just getting to know people in the industry can be really good. I personally also got a lot of value just reaching out to researchers. They're all busy, right? But they're all also really flattered when you're interested in their research. And there's a lot to learn from how these people are thinking that is beyond what's just in their papers that end up online. So great to talk to those kinds of people.
Nice. There's also a question from someone in the audience. And for anyone else, feel free to ask, right? Because now is the time. This is the moment. The question is, by how much did your working memory capacity increase by wearing the hum device every day? So do you have some kind of like metric or quantitative data or qualitative data?
Yeah, so the best answer to that question will come from you actually spending some time reading our white paper, which is on our website, thinkhum.com, on the science page, and then just download the PDF. We link back to a couple of studies that do almost exactly what the hum patch does in terms of stimulating two locations on the forehead at the 6 Hertz frequency for a short period of time. We have also done internal studies, one of which is fully written up within that white paper that kind of shows you exactly how this kind of needs to be evidenced. So that's the best way to get an answer to that question. The best short answer that I can give you is that it looks like it's about a 20% improvement in the way that we're currently doing it against a placebo, against a sham. The sham, I think, is important to talk about how we do that, because just like the replication crisis and the problems with study design these days, it's important to understand that it's done properly. So we do it by having the placebo group get stimulation at a different set of parameters. So they're still getting electrical stimulation. They're still experiencing everything that the person who's getting the real thing is experiencing. And then we pit those two groups, the placebo and the real thing, against each other on a variety of what are pretty universally accepted cognitive battery tests. So tests to measure people's working memory capacity. The one that's written up in our white paper is the reverse Causey block test, which is a test of particularly visual spatial working memory, which is flashing blocks on a screen that are in a randomized order, randomized placement. You have to be able to remember them backwards. But other good tests that have been used have been the digits test, the digit span, the dual NBAC test. If you look us up on Spotify, you'll hear a really good podcast by a reporter from the UK who used the dual NBAC test over a couple of weeks and tried hum and other things to see how it affected it. The 20% comes from the reverse Causey block test that's in the white paper, and it's measured by looking at the number of boxes, the number of squares that people can remember in the reverse order. And we went basically from just above 5 on average to just under 7. So that represents a 20% improvement in the amount of information you can hold in your visual spatial working memory. And we've measured it in various ways, less formally and just as formally. And it seems like a pretty reliable thing. Now, 20% might sound subtle, and in some ways it is. Like, I would like to be able to read a book instantaneously. I'm sure everyone here would too, right? And that's the goal. But a 20% improvement in working memory is groundbreaking because, one, there's nothing else that's ever been measured to do that at all, reliably, as much as with this brain stimulation seems to be able to do. Secondly, there's nothing out there that can do it instantaneously. I think the closest thing that we found in existing literature is a long history of being very good at meditating. Professional monks and things like that can switch into a mindset where they're able to get that kind of rapid improvement. But things that people normally reach for, like caffeine and meditation, they don't have this instantaneous effect. And the other thing to say about it is that a 20% improvement in the speed at which you can acquire skills, which is not quite what we're saying when we say a 20% improvement in working memory capacity, but it's pretty close, represents basically just like a compound interest effect in your ability to learn over time. So if you had a 20% better interest rate in the money you have in the bank today, it's not like maybe you get 10% on the stock market and it's not that much different, right? And I'm comparing, stock market here can be a stand-in for like caffeine or something like that. But that improvement that we're able to give people over those existing techniques, although it sounds incremental as a small percentage, over time really adds up. It's the difference between being able to learn a course in 6 months versus 2 months kind of thing. And there are lots of other factors that you need to balance. And this isn't the only thing you need to do to be able to learn a course in 2 months versus 6 months. Things like sleep, diet, exercise, and other important inputs into your learning speed, like stress, even just the color of your lights in your room, are important to be mindful of too. And we're making sure that we present that alongside information about how a device is useful. But nonetheless, that 20% improvement is pretty awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you meditate yourself?
Yeah, I have to.
Nice. Okay, so that's an interesting answer.
It's been an interesting year for everyone, I'm sure, but
yeah, absolutely.
Running a tech startup in 2020 was an even more interesting experience.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine. And how do you the reason why I ask is so then it's interesting because you have experience with both kind of, because you've also experimented with it yourself. So how would you compare the two, feeling wise, maybe subjective? Would you say that they're somewhat in the same class, or do they just have the same outputs, but the kind of means or the subjective perception of how that is different? How do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic with neurostimulation in general, because I think we're all familiar with the pretty blunt force ways of improving our cognitive functions or changing them. Things like meditation and caffeine, you can definitely feel the effects. And in some way, the effect on your feeling that those things have is part of the benefit or the change. One of the cool things about neurotechnology in general, but specifically the technology we're using, the TACS, frontal cortex stimulation, it doesn't give you any kind of change in feeling. We do notice that some people, and it's not just a placebo, because some people for many months afterwards notice this, get a feeling of kind of like enhanced focus that they can really feel. Not everyone gets that though, and actually it's more common to not be able to feel different at all after the 15 minutes. What is much more common is that you'll sit and be doing something cognitively difficult that's really stressing your working memory, and you'll just feel a little bit happier because you're able to get through stuff quicker. And that's particularly pronounced for people in high cognitive load industries, like in finance, medical doctors, scientists, who are pretty familiar with how much information they can acquire during a period of time. And that's one of the reasons that those groups are quite pronounced in our go-to-market group, and in the groups that we've been testing with, because they're able to kind of really notice that change. But it's a challenge and an opportunity that you don't really feel massively different. It's an opportunity because we can be much more precise than a lot of those blunt technologies and slow methods. But it's a challenge because how do you build a feedback cycle? How do you make someone confident that it's working if they don't have something that's easy to notice? And so that's where we see software, mindfulness, information, and coaching coming in and helping people to be able to measure how much information they're acquiring and then notice the improvement with hum. But it's something we're actively investigating and actively learning about as we go along. I'll say one more thing, which is that these devices that have come before us, like the Halo headset, which was for athletes to improve the speed at which they acquired physical skills. A really big problem for the everyday person in using that technology is this problem that you can't really notice a substantial difference in how you feel unless they're affecting the nervous system, like Think, THYNC, which was a device you stuck on your various nerves on the head and affected how you felt. Unless you're doing that kind of thing, which is not what TACS and TES in general does, you don't really get that pronounced feeling. So if you're going to go and spend $500 on a device that you have to really try hard to notice how it's improving you, and you have to put effort in, it can be much more disappointing that it's difficult. And so I think that one of the big challenges for a device that's a couple $100 and kind of intimidating to use, hard to use, you have to carry this headphone case around, those kinds of things, is really large. Whereas for a little patch that's about as quick to put on as a Band-Aid and about as scary as a Band-Aid too, and as easy to use as just putting it on for 15 minutes and taking it off, it's much less of a challenge, and we're able to kind of coach people through those initial experiences, get them to become familiar and excited about the benefits that they can experience by using the patch and recognize it day to day, and then go from there. Like increasing our goal over the next couple of years is to expand other cognitive functions, as well as to improve the way that we're doing this learning speed improvement by customizing it to people's individual brains and their performance on the day and stuff like that. So yeah.
Very interesting. And also what you mentioned with when you spend so much on a device, you want to know that it works, right? You want this feedback kind of loop. Makes me think of toothpaste in the beginning, where we already knew that it worked, but people didn't feel anything. Therefore, we just assumed that it didn't work, didn't catch on, until they added some useless thing that actually made your mouth slightly go numb, and suddenly everyone started doing it because you can build a habit around it, right? I think
we've had funny ideas just like that, like putting in like hint and things like that, or like one of the more funny ideas that someone suggested that we didn't even really consider was adding nicotine so that people can actually feel different when they stick it on their head. Lots of people have ideas about these things, but we've kind of doubled down on the idea that it's a challenge to educate people about how this works. And in that way, we're a bit of an education company. We have to build software and education resources that really help people understand how it works and what to expect and how to use it. And that work should come first, over and above anything that might be conceived or construed as like tricking people into something. And also, there's like an ethical, it's not really something we're having to confront right now because we're still, making the technology be used by people in general, but there's an ethical problem, I think, with building neurotechnology companies around the same methodology that we've had with like social media, of getting people to be addicted. And so really trying to like just be conscious of that and reflect our values of not having a negative influence in the world and for our own benefit, we've just avoided doing anything like that for now and focusing more on those like genuine education and experience focused tools.
Yeah, I think that's a wise decision as well. With toothpaste, it's only a funny story because toothpaste is actually something that does no harm, right? It helps people, right? Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting in those so much. All right, so
the bleak vision of the world where Hum or one of these companies
right.
has like the key that you need to feel good, and you have to be paid.
Yeah, that's not how it goes. All right, so what we have here is like we have a bunch of questions. I see that these weren't asked in the Q&A. What I've done, I have unlocked everyone, so you can now unmute yourself and turn on your video if you would like. So I think. One quick question that I see here in the top and that I'll just ask because it's a short one. It's like, is it already known what the price of Hum will be when it reaches market?
Yeah, we're not actually making that public yet. We're still investigating a couple of options. I can tell you that in 2019 we were talking about it being less than $10 to get one of the patches, and them being either single use or a couple of times use. But you'd be able to find that just by Googling us. But we're still working on that. We're working. One of the things that we're doing with their alpha is experimenting with different like usage strategies and timelines, and working with different types of customers, experimenting with who's going to be the perfect launch customer. And like there are pretty big implications stemming from who we pick and how we choose to make the device be used. So it's not something that we want to lock in just yet. That being said, one of our goals is product that we're doing very well, much better than anything I've seen in the past on getting done, is making it cheap or just very cost effective to use it. So it'll be like a coffee that you can think of rather than buying a coffee machine. Yeah.
There. Great analogy. All right, Asmita, you had a technical question. Would you mind turning on your own microphone at least, and then ask the question?
Yes. Hi. Yes, I can't turn on my video. I don't have that option. Oh.
All right. Let me see whether I can figure this out.
Well, but I can ask my question.
There you go. Feel free.
Yes. So my question was that, well, it is using TACS and the patches are on the forehead. So it's kind of, it is supposed to stimulate the frontal cortex, but it can be completely retinal stimulation, right? So what do you think about it? It can be retinal stimulation. So basically, yes, it's one of the major challenges, right, to guess if it's actually stimulating the brain areas or is it just some placebo and retinal stimulation. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, good question. And an alternative to that question as well is it nervous system stimulation? Obviously, we're close in proximity to a couple of important nerves with the placement of the patch as well. Yeah, so I definitely always think that the best answer to this question is that we just want to collect more data over time, and we'll continue to do that because it's very important to be able to like substantiate this. That being said, there are some pretty convincing studies out there showing that the TACS does actually have an effect on the brain directly, and the simple way of checking that is by putting an EEG on someone during the stimulation and after the stimulation. And there's a slightly harder but similar way as an MRI. A couple of devices have been on the market for a long time that have had to do that fundamental work. So we're kind of lucky to be able to stand on the shoulders of giants there. We can measure an increased amplitude behind, but after having been stimulated, it's very quick that increase in amplitude comes about, and that increase in amplitude of the theta frequency band sticks around for a couple of hours. You can even measure it up until about 24 hours. And some people, it's 100% gone a couple of days later at the very most. The behavioral effects we notice only a couple of hours. But the next part of that question is what's causing the effect, the behavioral effect that we're interested in. So retinal stimulation, for those who don't know what that means just like basically flashing lights in your eyes that match the frequency of the stimulation. So if you're just flashing, if you're reversing a electromagnetic field at 6 times a second on the forehead, you're going to see that in your eye as like a strobe light in your peripheral vision. We do think that that is having an effect on the brain signals. It is contributing, but not all people who wear the patch and the research devices that we used before the patch actually see that flashing. We do the tests in very bright rooms rather than dark rooms, and so not a lot of people notice it. And also, we know from a lot of EEG studies that when people have that boost in theta, they get pretty reliably that boost in learning speed, and that can come about from meditation and lots of other things too. Or you can just look at people who are studying and really focused versus people who are distracted, and you can see a difference in healthy people. That needs to be confirmed, because it gets more complicated when we're talking about ADHD and things. And so whatever causes the effect, which we do think is mostly electrical, but there is a small component of a retinal stimulation, is having the behavioral effect. You know, we have looked at things over time of like, could we just be flashing a light at someone rather than doing the stimulation, but we just weren't getting the same results. I think there's interesting work to be done there, but it's just not as convenient, first of all, and it doesn't seem to be as effective. The nervous system stimulation, so we pretty comprehensively modeled where the electricity is going from the patch, and we don't think it's actually really hitting any of the nerves. We're using an incredibly tiny amount of electricity too, and compared to a nerve stimulator, we're using something like 10 times less. We're using just a couple of milliamps of electricity. So if you mainly for the reason that we can get the effect, but also that it starts to get pretty damn painful. There are devices out there that I won't name that you can use that you stick on a nerve, whether it's inside your ear and it's hitting the vagal, or down the back of your neck and stuff like that. They burn your skin, like they hurt. And so we don't want to be doing that. But that's what's required to actually be hitting the nerve and having a substantial effect. And even with those devices, there's still reasonably modest effects on people's energy and stuff like that they're trying to improve. So those are the reasons that I can give you that are simple to understand, that are not just like chucking the modeling and stuff at you. The best answer to that question, again, is to go on the white paper, have a look at the actual specific tests, studies, and modeling work that we've done that'll kind of show you what I was saying. Great question.
Thank you for that answer. And just one more question following that up. So how much milliampere are you really using for the stimulation?
Yeah. We use less than a milliamp.
Less than 1 milliamp. Okay. All right. Okay.
It depends how you define it. Peak to peak, I think, is the way that you define it.
Yes.
Some people define it, that's 1.5. Yeah.
That's 1.5. Okay. That's
but,
like okay.
From base to the peak, it's 0.75. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right. I'm sorry, I might butcher the name, but Jorge is my guess.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to run in just a couple of minutes, so this may just be the last question, if that's okay.
That's completely fine. Then let's do the other one, Katarina, because I think that's a bit of a bigger question. Would you mind asking your own question? Not too big of a question.
Yeah, I can ask. So I was wondering if you're also looking how HAM is affecting global brain networks, so like functional or structural connectivity, and how it changes short term and also long term.
We haven't obviously collected data ourselves specifically looking at that question. We the short answer is we don't think so. We don't think it's causing any kind of underlying structural or functional changes, and we don't think that much at all of the electricity is really getting to those parts of the brain. But I think to answer such a specific question, it would be good to kind of talk directly, and it could be an interesting thing to look into over time. But it's not something that's really been flagged for us as a mechanism that we're interested in. sorry, that probably isn't unsatisfying answer to that question, but being precise here.
No, it's okay. It's a good answer. Thank you.
Right. Hey, thank you very much. We do indeed want to be respectful of your time. Thank you very much. It was also a very good talk. I think this was very insightful.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for coming. It's really flattering to have people like yourselves interested in what we're doing. You can always reach us if you have more specific questions. I don't answer questions from people who haven't read the white paper, so you got to do that. But I'm always my door's always open to help anyone with advice or connections or just feedback on something you're working on. Like NeuroTechX to me is I think the best group within the sphere of people who are interested about neurotechnology, have energy, want to try new things, but are grounded in science and want to do it properly and safely and for the benefit of the world. And I think it's really important that we continue to just help each other. And I encourage you also, the companies that are ahead of us, the scientists that are doing the best work in the world, if you have real stuff to talk about, they're actually pretty approachable. So yeah, all the best, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along. And I look forward to meeting a lot of you in person at some point.
Absolutely. Once all of this blows over, that will work out. Thank you.
Great.
All
right. I'll leave it then. See you guys.
It was a pleasure. All right. See you. Bye-bye. All right. And now it's us. That was the speaker. Honestly, that was the event. And we did have a bit of time left over for some discussion. So I think this pretty much comes down to all of you. If you feel like you have any questions or you would like to ask some questions to other people who are interested in the space, feel free to do that now, because I know that there are some very knowledgeable people among you. If you do, however, if you were here for the presentations, this was it. Also, feel free to continue your evening without this. And be sure to check out NeuroTechX, because I think there you will just neurotechx.com and you will find the entire overview of all the, all the different things that are going on. And for those that are leaving, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
This is always an interesting dynamic, right? The last bit.
That was really interesting. I really enjoyed Ian's talk. So.
He's a great speaker. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Did any of you have any questions that were unanswered or anything along those lines? Also could be about the presentation before that.
I also think maybe a good thing to ask is whether anyone here has any requests for what they would like to see in future events, because that would help us plan them. So if you have any recommendations, feel free to leave them in the chat or share them with us.
Double that. Totally agreed. All right. Yeah, I think like with this, I think that's perfect. So then maybe a more leading question to the ones of you who are still among us. Would anyone be opposed of us closing shop earlier? Hey, would like to see an offline neurotech event in Amsterdam sometime in the future. 100% there with you.
Yeah.
We can give a bit of context there. So initially that was the plan, of course. Then COVID hit. We started during COVID, so that's why we didn't do it yet. We do want to plan, however, as soon as we can, at least some kind of like, we can either call it a hack night with some proper hacking, in terms of like people getting together and working with the tech and exchanging ideas, all of that. We can also just organize some kind of like drinks, right? Let's meet at a specific bar. This feels very future focused, more so than the neurotech these days. But then we can also just meet at the bar and have drinks for those that are interested. So that's also just an option. Which of these sounds more interesting to you, I think? There you go. Yeah.
Yes, as Wessel just said, any suggestions actually, according to, well, like regarding the events, that we will have in the future, whether offline or online, are all welcome. We'd love to hear it. We're still quite new, at least this team and in the NeuroTechX community. So we are still quite open to what you have to say and what you would like to see, whether it's offline or online. So any suggestions for interesting offline ideas are also welcome. Love to hear them.
Yeah, totally agreed. Yeah, I think to concretely answer it, yes, there will be offline events as soon as we can. And you will find all of that, of course, through the Neurotech Amsterdam meetup. I saw a neurotic event in the event. Okay, most likely you found an event of NeuroTechX India. So NeuroTechX, that's actually the broader kind of realm. You can replace the X with the city or the country involved. So in this case, most likely NeuroTechX India, you can find them on Meetup.
I think I just saw their event was the 23rd of January, but it should be recorded and on the YouTube page of NeuroTechX if you want to watch it back.
Yes, as Mohit says in the chat, all the events are indeed on the YouTube NeuroTech channel. And honestly, they are very wide-ranging. Very wide-ranging, so that's very good. I've also seen a bunch of the different events from different chapters, and it's absolutely worth checking some out.
Also, thanks to Morgan for offering to help with future events. Feel free to reach out to see where you can help.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. You have a nice evening too.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're actually getting close to a kind of core group of people. Very welcome. Enjoy your evening, everyone, and I hope to see you at the next event. All right.
I think.
Shall we slowly close it off?
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
That sounds good.
All right.
Hey, thank you, Wessel, as well, for presenting. You did great. Philip, same to you. Ian, we already thanked. And thank you, everyone, for your attention. We'll close the link now, and
goodbye,
hope
everyone.
to see you at a future event.
See you soon.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.